Alright, level 11 on day 2, we're still on track. Now we just need to clear the castle real quick. Oh no. Come on, do your worst. Eagle strike! Unhand me! Wait, what? Oh no. No. Wait a second, we can talk about this. When From Software announced that their next game would be a multiplayer roguelike spin-off of Elden Ring, I was intrigued. I've always felt that the multiplayer aspect of Souls games had a lot of untapped potential, especially after having played the seamless co-op mod. And judging by the popularity of the mod, a lot of people must feel the same. A spin-off is also the perfect opportunity for experiments like this because, hey, if it doesn't work out, the next game could always return to form. Now, when I imagined what a roguelike Souls-like would look like, I envisioned something like a dungeon crawler. It makes sense, right? I mean, there is precedent for randomized content in FromSoft games with the Chalice dungeons from Bloodborne. And there are tons of excellent roguelikes they could draw inspiration from, so to me, it seemed like a winning formula. It was also revealed that they would reuse content from the 3 Dark Souls games, which I thought was a great idea. Just imagine fighting your way through a randomized Sense Fortress, complete with new enemies, traps, secrets, while using whatever weapons and items the game throws at you. And all that in jolly cooperation. Now to some, mentioning Souls-like and co-op in the same sentence is akin to blasphemy, which I guess is an understandable position, despite it being a core element as far back as Demon's Souls. But solo has always been the more consistent and legitimate challenge, mostly because the AI never did well with multiple targets. On the other hand, co-op opens up some exciting new possibilities like synergies between different builds. Tanking can be a legit role since others can deal damage while you keep the enemy occupied, spells and abilities with longer animations are more viable, and the effects of support spells are also multiplied. But in fact, Nightreign turned out to be Elden Ring meets an extraction shooter, effectively turning the exploration portion of Elden Ring into the main gameplay loop, except now it's also timed, so you have to rush through the map. An interesting concept, so how did it turn out? Pretty well, all things considered. The best thing about Nightreign is that you get to experience the combat of Elden Ring without having to commit to another 100-hour playthrough. They managed to condense the game into easily digestible 30 to 45 minute segments with an elaborate boss fight at the end as a cherry on top, and package it all into a multiplayer experience, featuring proprietary clown-to-clown connection technology. In fact, everything Elden Ring about this game is great. The controls are fluid and precise, combat is fast and impactful, and the new boss fights are a spectacle. Everything roguelike about it, however, is how do I say this? When I compare Nightreign to other roguelikes, I find it difficult to appreciate the things it does differently. Let me explain what the game looks like first. Before each game, you pick your Nightfarer. These are pre-made characters with a well-defined archetype each, and you can have multiple, so don't worry about your main getting insta-locked. Then you choose which Night Lord you want to target, and jump right into Limveld by yourself, with friends, or a group of randoms. The map has 5 variants, the default one and 4 alternate versions, where roughly a quarter of the map is transformed by an event called Shifting Earth. To be clear, this happens before the run starts, not during like I assumed it would. It can happen randomly, or you can trigger it in exchange for a currency. The enemies and points of interest on the map are randomized, though not their locations. In fact, most of the locations are marked on your map from the get-go, only some things are hidden. In regular Battle Royale fashion, there's a damaging circle closing in, so you want to get as much loot as possible before it constricts around a small area. This is where you will face a pre-boss encounter, then a night boss. Unlike most extraction games, dying before the boss does not mean game over. You get to respawn, though you will lose a level, which you can recover if you pick your souls back up. Souls-like style. Dying at the bosses though means it's back to roundtable hold. Of course, players can revive each other. Now once you're finished with the boss, the flames recede and you get to do it all over again. Except none of the enemies you killed respawn, so you need to find a different route. Once you're done with the second night boss, you face the final boss, the Night Lord. The enemies and bosses you encounter are all lifted from Elden Ring, with some additions from the Dark Souls trilogy. But the Night Lords are brand new designs. The enemy AI was reworked to better accommodate multiple targets. In the base game, enemies always focus on the last entity that dealt damage to them, whether it's a player, phantom or spirit ash. This makes them more erratic and more exploitable, and is the main reason why playing the game in co-op is so much easier. In Nightreign though, the enemies tend to stick to their targets. But the moveset of the Night Lords makes it pretty easy to get caught by an attack that's intended for a different player, and so it's not like the game is too easy or predictable either. I was kinda worried about the AI, so I'm glad to see that FromSoft delivered. In Elden Ring, you get to fully customize your character, including equipment and attributes. The characters in Nightreign, the Nightfarers, are a bit more restrictive. Their attributes are preset and they increase automatically as you level up. This is what determines what archetype they fall into, while there is a melee specialist with high mobility thanks to his grappling hook and an explosive ultimate. Guardian is a tank with high health and a unique guard counter, so he works best when using a shield. Iron Eye is the bow guy, though technically he could use any dex scaling weapon, but come on, he's the bow guy. Duchess has high dexterity and intelligence, so basically a Moonveil user. Raider has the highest strength, Revenant is a summoner and faith spellcaster, Recluse is more the dedicated spellcaster, and Executor is a resident edgelord, Rivers of Blood user, aura farmer. The characters also come with 3 abilities. A passive, a short cooldown skill, and a longer cooldown ultimate. These abilities cost no FP or any other resource, you just wait for them to come off of cooldown, so you'll be using them pretty often. Nightfarers can also equip a set of relics which give them various bonuses, and these are almost identical to the runes in Bloodborne. Generally speaking, your relic loadout won't alter your character significantly. It's mostly just minor bonuses, though there are some interesting passives. The way to actually customize your Nightfarer is with loot. So what kind of loot can you get? Well, first of all, every enemy killed gives you runes, which you use to level up. Leveling up increases your attributes based on your character's attribute scalings. You may also spend your runes at merchants. Then you have the loot from completing objectives, mainly killing mini-bosses. These can give you both passives and weapons. Passives function just like the items in Risk of Rain, meaning they give you a stacking passive bonus like extra health. Now weapons are a bit more complicated. They each have different damage stats, so you have to take that into account, but they also come with random passives attached. Now for some of the passives to be active you need to have the weapon in hand, but this seems to be the minority. Most of them are active as long as the weapon is in your inventory. So the idea is that you fill your 6 weapon slots with passives that are useful, but then you also need a weapon to deal damage. Talismans are basically ripped from the base game. They also give you passive bonuses, except you can only equip 2 of them. And sometimes these bonuses are identical to the passives you can pick up. You either get them from the chest after the basement boss in the castle, or from these scarabs. Hey, excuse me, do you guys mind? Sheesh, I'm trying to do a demonstration here. Wait, what is this? Tsukuyomi. Whoa. The next 72 hours will be nothing but bads. Damn it! And the talisman is trash too. But where was I? There are also consumables to pick up. They drop from all over the place. These are single-use items, either buffs or throwables, and you can only carry 4 stacks at a time. Weapon upgrade materials and Everdark keys also occupy the same slot, but I guess the idea is that you use these up too. And finally, churches always give you an Estus Blast charge, one of few rewards that are actually guaranteed. All Nightfarers share the same loot table, although it seems like the chances are skewed towards appropriate loot. Hard to tell, and the same is true for the damage type rewards. A fire camp might give you a fire weapon as a reward, or it might not, there is no guarantee. I have problems with multiple aspects of the loot system, but I think the core issue is this. The game simply doesn't allow for any meaningful customization of the player character. Let me explain. Like I said, the Nightfarers come with a set of attribute scalings. The codex tells you what they are for each of them. Keep in mind, this is scaling and not your starting stats, so the differences only become more pronounced as you reach max level. To put some numbers to it, Raider with an A rating in Vigor starts with 9 Vigor at level 1 and ends up with 56 at level 15. Recluse with her D rating in Vigor starts with 6 Vigor and gets to 33 at level 15. In terms of health, Raider starts with 260, Recluse starts with 200. Then Raider ends up with 1200 while Recluse gets only 740. So a difference of 60 grows into 460. And the same is true for damage stats. Raider has an S in strength and deals 83 damage per hit with his axe at level 1, then 160 at level 15, while Recluse with D scaling deals 61 damage with the same weapon at level 1 and 83 at level 15, almost exactly half of Raider's damage. If we switch over to spells, Recluse deals 81 damage with Glintstone Pebble at level 1 and 133 at level 15. Meanwhile, Raider deals only 70 damage at level 1, which grows to a whopping 72 at level 15, which is still lower than Recluse at level 1. And once again, this is scaling, so the difference is even more apparent with higher tier weapons. As a side note, there are relics which give you a small bonus to one of your attributes, but this is just a flat bonus which does not seem to scale, so it's actually negligible at max level. They won't fundamentally change your character is what I'm trying to say. What all this means is that there is pretty much just one intended playstyle for each character that you can't deviate from too much. Or technically you could, but it puts you at a massive disadvantage. And with how difficult the Night Lords can get, especially the Everdark versions, I would consider it more of a self-imposed challenge than a viable or intended playstyle. The passives also give percentage bonuses, which means they are way more useful for the character they were intended for. If we go back to our previous example, a plus 10% health increase means 120 health for the Raider and 74 for the Recluse. Same passive, almost half the value. So, with all that in mind, my question is, why do these characters share a loot table? Much of the loot that you get, be it weapons, passives or weapon passives, will only be useful for certain characters. Couple that with loot that's way too niche to be useful for anyone, and you've got yourself a real underwhelming loot system. For example, in this game, we killed this big shifting earth boss, and hey, would you look at that? We struck gold, he dropped a legendary scepter, an epic jar cannon, and a spellcasting passive. For Executor, this is useless. The best choice here is to pick the jar cannon and drop it for Iron Eye, which is cool for him, but this is not necessarily what you want to see when you get a legendary drop. RNG is a core part of the roguelike experience. Part of the fun is you don't always get what you want, the most optimal items available. You've got to improvise, adapt, and play with the cards that you've been dealt. But I've never seen a reward system where so much of the loot is straight garbage. Look at Risk of Rain for example. Obviously some items are going to be more valuable to one character than the others, but at least every artifact gives you some sort of power increase. And then you get so many items in a match that your character is barely recognizable by the end, both visually and in gameplay. With the amount of loot that you get, it really doesn't matter if a couple of them aren't exactly what you wanted, and even then, you actually have a way to trade in unwanted items which does not exist in Nightreign. So in Nightreign you get fewer items and the difference between good and bad loot is way too big. Instead of collecting loot to develop your character in unique and interesting ways, you're rolling the dice as many times as possible, hoping to get the loot that you actually need from a pile of trash. As Executor for example, getting any spellcasting reward is pointless, as his scaling in both Faith and Int is D tier. You need dex scaling weapons with status effects like Rivers of Blood or Eleonora's Pole Blade and appropriate passives. What you don't need is increased damage against dragons after casting a Dragon Communion spell, or improved perfuming arts. Actually, nobody needs these, but you're just as likely to get it as something that will straight up be the difference between life and death. If you started out with a more generic character and you could turn them into different archetypes like you do in Elden Ring, this could work better. But I think as soon as they decided on pre-made Nightfarers, they should have ditched the concept of shared loot entirely and created separate loot tables for each of them. This would make looting way more rewarding, since now you know that you're always getting something appropriate for your character. This seems to be the case, more or less, as the game is more likely to give you rewards that fit your character, but then what's the point of getting the rest of the loot? It not only serves to frustrate the player, it's also a huge missed opportunity, since you don't get a chance to truly customize your character. When I first played the game, I expected the camps, marked for different damage types, to facilitate that, but a camp being marked rarely even seems to affect the kind of reward that you get. For example, this is a fire camp reward, but only one out of the 3 rewards even has anything to do with fire, and ironically, it just so happens to be a weapon that's not a good fit for Raider. This means that even if I try to go for fire rewards exclusively, there is no guarantee that I'll be able to put a viable fire build together. And there are only 3 fire rewards on the whole map, which we might not even get to. But hey, at least I got a fire weapon. Now the madness camps never seem to give me a madness reward. Not even something generic like guaranteed madness resistance or something. In an alternate, better version of the game, you could build your character along these different damage types or spell classes if you're a spellcaster. Just like you already could in the base game. Let's say you pick, I don't know, Executor for example. You get a poison weapon, right? Because that works well with his high arcane. Then you get a passive which creates a poison cloud when you critically hit a poisoned enemy. Then another which makes poisoned enemies' stance break easier. Then another which increases poison damage. You get the idea. So just with the Executor you could go for bleed, poison, frost, and so on. And the same would be true for other characters. Thorn Magic, Ice Magic, Carrion Spellblade, Glintstone for Recluse, Black Flame, Dragon, Frenzy for Revenant. Imagine how much more varied runs with the same character could be. This is exactly how Hades works. Each run, 4 different gods help you out on your journey, granting you boons which are either upgrades to your character that have no limit, or upgrades to one of your abilities and you can only equip 1 per ability. When you pick a reward up, you get your choice of 3 boons, pretty much identical to Nightreign. Now the cool thing is, the boons of each god are themed around their mechanics. Zeus is all about lightning, Ares has blade drifts, Artemis has critical hits, and so on. Let's say you pick the Zeus boon that makes your special strike nearby enemies with lightning. Then you get the boon which gives lightning a chance to strike twice. Then another which makes lightning strike a larger area. Then yet another which makes lightning apply a debuff, and now you've got yourself a lightning special build. It synergizes real well with the Zeus aspect shield. And this is just one possible combination with both Zeus and the shield. On a different run you may focus on another ability or another aspect of the same god, or get different gods altogether. This all adds up to a lot of variety between runs, and that's not even to mention the weapon aspects, Daedalus upgrades, chaos boons, and so on. The thing about Hades is also that you can only get each boon once, so even if you pick up a suboptimal one, that still increases your chances that you'll get the one you want next time around. And you still get to sell your boons for money. Once again, no such luck in Nightreign, even though it also has a common currency. And since I brought up Hades, let's also discuss how much cleaner the UI of that game is. All the rewards are color-coded to their respective gods, have unique icons, and all the important information in the text is highlighted. I suppose even this could be improved. I mean, what even does sturdy mean? They could really make it more obvious. Yeah, this is beautiful, and it tells you everything you need to know about your choices. Meanwhile in Nightreign, longer invincibility windows during evasive maneuvers. May I know how much longer? Is that a secret? Violent deluge of star rain while walking. Okay, there's a tooltip. Summons a dark cloud of stars overhead while walking. The cloud will release a violent deluge of star rain? What does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Even when the language is clear, look how clumsy it is. Increased maximum HP plus 10%, maximum HP raised.
Revolver Ocelot.
Certain tooltips are straight up misleading. Sudden enemy death upon attacks that land. What, as opposed to ones that don't? None of the other tooltips specify that. Successful parries activate Golden Retaliation. Increase damage after critical hit. Okay, so this is like a damage buff, right? Nope, it's actually a vulnerability debuff on the enemy. Critical hits inflict blood loss. Okay, cannot be more clear than this. The enemy bleeds out after a critical hit, right? No, you get a bleed buff on your weapon. Guard counters activate holy attacks. Guard counters trigger holy burst. Yeah, that's what it actually does. Why not just say that on the top? Of course, a lot of this is just clumsy translations. Speaking of translations, let's see how they're doing over in Germany. Nacht. Overgeangre plus 32%. Man, what? Don't ask me why, but as a German, you just get these things.
Erhöhte Schadensresistenz nach Treffen mit aufgeladenen Angriffen.
It's that simple, kids. You absolutely do not get these things as German. They just can't catch a break over there, huh? Actually, Hades is completely fine, even in German. It does look like they had to lower the font size so everything fits on screen, but you know what? That's on Germany, not super giant. The cutest thing about the UI is that it actually tells you what passives you have when you loot. I didn't even notice until I started rewatching my footage. Can you spot it? Yeah, it's right there. What's even the point of this? The weapons are by far the worst offenders. In order to see the actual stats and passives on a weapon, you have to select them with the cursor. Look at all this wasted space. Couldn't they at least put the passive ability there? Check out the talismans too. Boost non-physical damage negation. Okay, by how much? Ah, 10%. I mean, I couldn't possibly find space for that info. And with all this space taken up by the weapon selection UI, they don't even tell you the stat scaling. It doesn't even show up if you press details, you either have to read it in roundtable hold or remember it from the base game, I guess. Weapons are just the worst part of the loot overall too. When you get a weapon reward, you first have to decide if it's better than the one you're using. If that's not the case, see if you need the passive from it. But if your weapon slots are already full, you have to remember all 6 weapon passives you already have and decide if you want to swap one of them out. And if none of those apply, see if any of the weapons are at least good for your allies. But also don't take too long because we're on a timer. Sometimes you have to make a decision as the flames are closing in and you're just sitting there flipping through all the weapons to read their passives. This system is incredibly unintuitive, especially for new players who don't know what to look at yet or even what weapon is good for their Nightfarer. For me, I just get rid of the weapon passives altogether, at least the ones that give you the bonuses when they are in your inventory. Let's just have like 4 weapon slots that you fill up with weapons that you actually want to use. That's more than enough, even for spellcasters. Now, for the talismans, I'm confused why they are separate from passives to begin with, especially since there is such a big overlap between them. For something that you can only equip 2 of, you'd think their effects would be a bit more impactful. If that was the case, I'd think I'd be more positive towards them. As it is, all I can think of is that if passives and talismans were to be merged, we could have unique symbols for each passive. Consumables are a mechanic that I don't often see people interacting with, and honestly, I can see why. A lot of them tend to drop, and you can't tell what they are just by looking at them. You have to walk over them one by one. Once again, this is horrible for new players who are not familiar with these items yet. And as for veterans, frankly, the items aren't worth the trouble for them either. The throwables do surprisingly low damage, the buffs only last 1 minute, and the resistance bonuses are actually pretty useful, if you happen to encounter their respective status effect. But that doesn't happen very often besides 3 specific Night Lords where it becomes absolutely vital to have them. The issue here is that you can only carry 4 stacks at a time, and the stack sizes are very small. 2 Exalted Flesh for a grand total of 2 minutes of increased damage, 2 Firebombs for a combined 330 fire damage, provided you even hit, and so on. Starlight Shards are the only consumable I use regularly since they let you use their abilities and spells more, but the rest are kinda useless. I think consumables need unique graphics so that you can tell what's on the ground at first glance. It also wouldn't hurt if their effects were a little bit more impactful as well. As it is, the boss fights last way too long for them to be of any serious help. Maybe consumables would be better off being cooldown based abilities. I know I'd be more likely to use firebombs if I could throw one every minute instead of like 2 in total. Having a reusable Starlight Shard to recover FP would also help characters besides Recluse cast spells and use abilities more consistently without having to rely on a passive dropping. If you look at other roguelikes, you'll notice that you get way more loot than you do in Nightreign. Ironically, even in Risk of Rain where players compete for the same loot, you end up with a lot more items. Perhaps Nightreign could do with some of this as well. Getting a power that stinks wouldn't hurt quite as bad, and it would allow you to specialize your character more. Maybe you could have like 3 clusters of enemies at each location that all drop loot. This would also incentivize you to clear out more of the map, because right now you mostly just beeline it to the mini-boss, then move on to the next. Along with these changes, I would also separate some of the loot into their own categories, just like how Estus Flash charges are separated already. Weapon and passive drops are an obvious candidate, and more generic upgrades like health and damage bonuses might also work better as separate pickups. This would also make looting easier to understand, as you'd know ahead of time what type of loot you'll get. And it would give players more control over how they want to customize their character. Some players may forego defensive upgrades in favor of more damage, for example. Balancing the game would also be easier, as they could better approximate how much health players will have by the end of each run instead of it being up to chance. I mean, you know, if balance was ever a consideration to begin with. Now let's have a look at those elusive relics, which I think is another missed opportunity. You can equip 3 different relics that come with up to 3 passive bonuses each. Now, there are 2 main categories of relics: pre-made ones that you buy at the store, earn from each of the Night Lords or get from the character questlines, and random ones that you get at the end of each run or by gambling your currency away. The pre-made relics are created with a specific theme in mind. There are some that are tailor-made for certain Nightfarers, others are meant to support spellcasting, there is the infamous Everjail one, and so on. The effects on the random relics, on the other hand, are assembled with no rhyme or reason at all. This creates the same problem that the loot has. Relic passives are either good for your Nightfarer or useless. It's pretty simple, really. You think you'd be able to put together different starter builds with relics, but just like with the loot, you can only customize your character so much. The most impactful passives are the ability modifiers. These have a tangible impact on gameplay, changing how the abilities themselves work. Not all of them are as flashy as Wilder's grappling hook follow-up, but they do help change things up. And I wish there were more of these for each character. Then you get a Wilder relic with glintstone scraps and holy attack power. So once you have a setup that you like with the pre-made relics, it's a matter of rolling the dice over and over again to get a relic that's better than the ones you already own. But with how many possible combinations there are, the chances of that are astronomically low. Is this fun for anyone? Gambling away all your souls for a 0.1% chance to get a relic that gives you a marginal power increase? I guess it goes without saying, but the relic UI is also awful. There is no reason it couldn't show you the effects from all 3 relics at the same time, or god forbid their cumulative effects. Not that we even know if some of these effects stack or not. Honestly, the relic system the way it is, I say just toss it. The vast majority of the perks are pointless, and for the ability modifiers, I'd really prefer if they were just part of a separate system instead. Even something basic like a skill tree system would be pretty cool. Imagine if all Nightfarer abilities had variants which would change their function. Like Duchess's ult could have one where it creates an invisibility area instead and it lasts longer than the original buff. Guardian's passive could shield him from all sides but make him completely immobile. You could maybe unlock these by beating each boss with each character. This way, also, completionists would have an excuse to do the whole gauntlet with each. I was surprised to see that each Night Lord is assigned a limited number of night bosses and like 3 events. I was surprised because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Wouldn't it be better to have the entire pool available to all Night Lords? I can't think of a good reason to keep it this way. I guess you get more guaranteed variety if you clear the Night Lord list relatively quickly, but if you get stuck on one of them, you'll end up seeing the same bosses and events over and over again. This diminishes the chances of something unexpected occurring each run, especially once you know what's available for each Night Lord. The Fell Omen invading randomly is a really cool idea. You can never feel safe because at every turn, Margit the Hater might show up. Except he doesn't. He only does that for 3 bosses. Honestly though, most of the events aren't much fun to begin with the Locust Swarm probably being my least favorite. Now I sound like a certain pharaoh. He keeps spawning these zones that drain your levels and then you have to hunt him down across the entire map. But watch out, if the circle gets in first, your levels are lost forever. At least shifting earth happens independently of the bosses, although that has its own issues. The shifting earth zones give you a unique reward each. The Crater lets you upgrade one weapon to legendary status. This can mean a pretty substantial damage increase. The Swamp makes you immune to Scarlet Rot and it also gives you a Bloodborne style health recovery. Now this one's interesting because you'd want to get the power before you explore the swamp, since the area itself gives you Scarlet Rot. Once again, status effects are otherwise pretty rare. The health recovery is not super useful in my experience either, but at least it's something. Unlike the mountain reward, which makes you a bit more resistant to frostbite. And that's it. This is amazing for one specific Night Lord, but the rest don't do any frostbite, so it ends up being useless. The field bosses in the mountain are also likely to give you frost resistance or anti-dragon damage, and the final boss of the mountain is a frost dragon. So it's like you're supposed to clear the mountain, then beat the dragon with all the frost resistance and anti-dragon damage. But is that really worth it? For just one measly reward drop? If you're going up against Caligo, the mountains are a must, but otherwise it's just an endgame area where some of the loot is guaranteed to be anti-frost dragon. In other words, useless. Then you have the city, which comes with 2 rewards. First is an extra life, which also powers you up if you do revive with that life. This straight up carried me in a couple of boss fights. And you also get to duplicate one of your weapons, which is great if you want to dual wield or give the weapon to one of your allies. So the city is always amazing. Shifting Earth is prime secondary activity because the zones are full of field bosses. That's the main reason you do them anyway. It also makes sense that the city and the crater would have better rewards since those are locked behind bosses. It's mostly the mountain I'm confused by. It seems so specifically made to counter one Night Lord. I think the dragon should give another power up. Lot of dragons in this game, huh? The night bosses and enemies having such limited variety in the game is also a bit puzzling. Yes, they could have brought in more stuff from the Dark Souls trilogy, but it's not even that. Where are all the enemies from the base game? You'll face a lot of the same bosses over and over again, and a lot of these guys are already some of the most common bosses in Elden Ring. Also rated tree spirits are here again, thank god, along with their tree avatar. Deathrite birds can show up as field bosses, Everjail bosses, castle bosses, and night bosses. I went back to Elden Ring to get some footage and managed to run into 2 birds and an avatar within half an hour. This was unplanned, by the way, this is just an old save I loaded up. At least in Elden Ring there are multiple versions of these bosses. I just don't get it because there are so many different enemies they could introduce with practically zero effort. And then there is an entire DLC they could use. Oh, I forgot, they brought in hippos. And nothing else. It's understandable with the Dark Souls bosses, I can imagine those do take some time to implement. But still, I was a bit disappointed that they only brought in 2 bosses per game. And that's not even to mention all the other content they could have brought over, like enemies, weapons or other hazards. Imagine if mimics could show up randomly, or if you could get Artorias' greatsword. My biggest worry with all this is that they only plan to expand the boss list when they get to expanding the Night Lord lineup, which will probably only happen in the upcoming DLC. And that would be a shame. I'm getting a bit tired of fighting Crucible Knights all the time. Speaking of the DLC, it's probably inevitable, but I'm also not in favor of putting new Night Lords into DLC. This would fracture the player base, locking players who don't own it out of the new and undoubtedly more popular Night Lords. Putting new characters behind the paywall makes more sense to me, but we'll see what happens. There are rumors of a new game mode and that's also interesting. A dungeon crawler perhaps? Look, as integral as it is to the game, a lot of my issues with it stem from the time limit it imposes on the player. It really shoehorns you into only one playstyle, which is to try to nuke the mini-bosses as quickly as possible, then rush over to the next one. I think this works as an optional challenge, but having it as the game mode means that certain characters are at an objective disadvantage compared to the others. As the dedicated tank, Guardian has pretty bad scaling in both physical and spellcasting damage, and because there is no way to taunt enemies, besides passes which you may not even get, there isn't much point to having a character who's only good at damage mitigation. This is a similar criticism that I have for World of Warcraft of all games. Now, I don't play it currently, and honestly, I've never been a high-end player, but it seems to me that because all Mythic Plus dungeons are timed, it's crucial to get the highest DPS possible. This usually boils down to 1 or 2 specs, which in turn makes entire classes completely obsolete. It's even worse in that game though, because at that point you either level a new character or you just make peace with never getting into any mythic groups, and then you keep scrolling the patch notes waiting for your class to be buffed. Which, in case you're a paladin, is gonna be sometime after the Armageddon. If timed mode was an optional challenge, say a mythic affix, more builds could be viable since utility and survivability would be more of a factor in a class's usefulness. Speaking of mythic affixes, Nightreign also has optional challenges for players looking for more difficulty. This is pretty standard for roguelikes. Risk of Rain has difficulty levels, while Hades has a more elaborate system where you get to customize your difficulty. Nightreign has 2 separate challenges, Everdark Bosses and Deep Night mode. Everdark Bosses are powered up versions of the Night Lords complete with new mechanics and sometimes entire new phases. And this can mean a significant jump in difficulty. Some bosses that became trivial to me gave me a lot of trouble in Everdark mode. Everdark bosses were released one by one, with a maximum of 2 of them being available at a time as limited time challenges. Originally, I assumed that they would all be made available once all of them were released, but that wasn't the case. It's not the worst idea, since otherwise the player base would be more divided across all the Night Lords. But it also means that you only have a week to beat the bosses, and you may have to wait several weeks until you can try again. I can't help but think that there is a better solution here. In Hades, one of your weapons is marked before each run, earning you more resources if you pick it. Nightlords and Everdark bosses could be marked in the same way, granting you bonus currency for beating that boss, while others would still be available. Now, Everdark mode does not change the rest of the game, which I thought was strange, but as it turns out, that's what Deep Night mode is for. So Deep of Night mode is a proper hard mode, and it doubles down on all my problems with the game. Even more RNG, and an even more cumbersome UI. Enemies get a boost to their health and damage, which is shockingly uncreative, especially for a game where more powerful versions of enemies with expanded movesets already exist. As you win games, your depth level increases and the enemy scaling goes even crazier. To balance it out, you can now get red or unique weapons. These can have multiple passives attached, but can also have negative passives, so reading the whole tooltip is more important than ever, otherwise you might get stuck with a weapon that totally screws you over, like constantly drains your HP. Uniques drop from powered up enemies marked with this red effect. Both bosses and normal enemies can get powered up, which incentivizes players to clear out more of each camp to hunt them down, and I think this kind of randomness is a good direction. Players should always feel like there is something for them to do. You also go up against random Nightlords, which I also like, although I can imagine it becoming frustrating if you see the same bosses over and over again. Anyway, it's nice to get new content for the game, but I'm not super impressed by this one. The new unique weapons exacerbate my biggest problems with the game. RNG is even more extreme, and now you have to contend with the negative effects as well, so you need to read an entire paragraph before you pick them up. And then you either get a completely broken weapon that trivializes the game, or one that actually hinders you while you face enemies with inflated health and damage. And then, because the time to kill is longer, you get to clear less of the map too, so you get less loot as a result. Nightreign continues the FromSoft tradition of having very limited communication, with the only new option being a ping. The ping is nice, in particular having a shortcut to ping yourself or an item at your feet. However, this is simply not enough, not with randoms at least. First of all, it would be nice to have some sort of emote system with special pings. Being able to say thank you or sorry without having to stop and use a gesture, which other players might miss anyway. And being able to ping a retreat or put down multiple pins to mark a route. Second of all, I really think a chat system could benefit the game a lot, especially when you have players with different skill levels and experience. Sometimes players will do something you may not understand, like take an unconventional route through an area. And unless you're up to date with all the meta strategies, you may assume that they're doing something wrong, and without chat, they have no way to explain themselves. I appreciate the fact that this is FromSoft's first multiplayer-oriented game, so they never had to consider these kinds of things before, but if they want to keep this experiment going, I'd recommend looking at existing multiplayer games and understanding why they have certain features. Features like being able to stay in a lobby with your team after a game. That's right, if you play with randoms, the game unceremoniously boosts you out of the party as soon as the round ends. There is no way to stay together or send a friend request either. There's also no way to kick, block, or report players, which is not a feature I'd use often, but I've seen others encounter cheaters, and currently the only way to get rid of them is to leave the game yourself and block them through Steam, which is a feature of Steam that you might not even have been aware of. You can use it to block hackers in the other Souls games too, and they won't be able to invade anymore. Also, why don't your party members show up in Roundtable Hold? I was really surprised that doesn't happen, and yeah, there's already a mod that fixes it. Is it because you have NPC versions of every Nightfarer sitting around, so you'd need to get rid of one of them when a player joins? Or would it break immersion to have multiples of the same character? FromSoft, I promise you people wouldn't mind. It's not like there is much point to having the Nightfarers around anyway, all they do is repeat a couple lines of dialogue. The Nightfarers being so different from each other adds a lot to the replay value, and I like how much visual variety there is between them, even having different body types and heights. I think both the default designs and the skins are appealing, and I wouldn't mind a few more being added over time to each. But there are a couple of balance issues here. First off, having this much of a gap in health leads to certain characters feeling extremely fragile. Damage that would only put Raider at roughly half HP will outright kill one of the girls. And like I've said, he also gets more out of the health upgrades. If the game had slower, more deliberate gameplay where ranged DPS could stay at the backline while melee keeps the enemy away from them, this wouldn't be an issue, but as it is, the tank characters cannot really tank. Every player has to deal with huge swings and area abilities, especially when fighting the Night Lords. So separating health upgrades into their own category, just like the flask upgrades, could help fragile characters keep up with the big guys. This unfairness goes both ways, since the tanks being good at taking damage doesn't help the team much. This doesn't matter for Raider and Executor that much, since they can still do good damage, but Guardian is kinda screwed. The shield stance passive he has takes stamina to activate, drains stamina while it's active, and the buff it gives is not even that significant. It's okay against smaller enemies, where you don't need that much help to begin with, but against bosses it's just pitiful. Also, you still take cheap damage from spells, and are stance broken if you run out of stamina. And even if you do manage to block damage with it, now what? You still need to deal damage, and now you have no stamina to retaliate. The guard counter, especially the charged one, also costs a lot of stamina, takes way too long to activate, so the enemy might be 2 zip codes away by the time it hits, and it leaves you vulnerable in the meantime. Contrast this with Raider's Retaliation. He gets to use it whenever it's off cooldown, so you can time it when the enemy gets near, and it also gives you hyper armor, so you can't be knocked down and you take less damage. The only complaint I have for this is that the passive is kinda silly. It powers up your retaliation after you take a lot of damage, but it's cumulative, so you'll just see the ability get powered up every now and then as you get hit. Wouldn't it make more sense if the ability powered up if you took damage while using it? This would make it more interesting to use, since you'd have to time it so that you both block a big attack and hit the enemy. And it can actually work like this. If your passive pops while you're retaliating, it gets charged up midway through. But wait, my point is, Guardian could use a bit of love. If his Phalanx mode is gonna drain stamina anyway, the buff it gives should be way more powerful, like reduce the stamina it takes to block an attack to 1. Also, his special charged guard counter should probably still block attacks while he's doing it or something. Recluse is mostly fine, I think, but the magic cocktail ability is a bit annoying to use. You can absorb essence anytime elemental damage is dealt to anyone, even allies. This is your way of consistently recovering FP. Now once you've collected 3 essences, you can unleash them as a magic cocktail, the idea being that the more complex the combination is, the better the spell is gonna be. But in my experience, it's often difficult to get the essences you want since elements overwrite each other. Say if someone has a fire weapon, you'll be stuck absorbing only fire. You'll end up seeing the same magic cocktail a lot in a run, and the whole mechanic ends up being less interesting than it sounds. You want to keep absorbing essence to recover FP, but after every 3 absorbs, you have to cast a magic cocktail to absorb more. I think it could work better if you could keep absorbing essence after filling up, and casting the magic cocktail would be a separate input. Then you would just use the last 3 essences you absorbed. This would give you more control over what cocktail you cast, and wouldn't slow you down with having to cast it just to get more FP. I'm always happy to see a Duchess on the team. Her ability lets her reapply the damage that was done to an enemy over the last 3 seconds, so she does well on teams that already do high damage, and more specifically burst damage. This includes status effects, so she pairs well with Executor, my beloved. 2 things kinda bother me though. The visual effect on her ability is a bit obstructive, especially on bigger enemies. And the invisibility ult is a bit lame, since enemies will still react to getting hit and you are still vulnerable. I've mostly seen it used to revive a downed ally, but other ults outperform it even for that purpose. I think it needs a rework from the ground up. Revenant relies a lot on her summons, but unfortunately she doesn't get a lot of control over them. I think they should always attack the enemy you target, or the game should have some sort of input for changing targets. That would make Revenant the god of revives. Her passive also does nothing for the final boss. I point these kind of things out because at a certain point, the Nightlords will be the only difficult part of the game for any player. They can take up like a third of the total playtime in a run, which I guess is appropriate since the boss is supposed to be the 3rd day, so a character that does worse against single targets ends up being a worse character overall. Same issue with Guardian. Executor is my favorite character. Feel free to take a minute to come to terms with that revelation. His blade works way better for tanking than Guardian's shield. As long as you're deflecting, you can't be stance broken, and it blocks all damage. It can even block spells, even the big explosions, and you won't even take chip damage. Awesome. It's not very good for attacking though, and you can't stack status effects with it, which is Executor's whole thing. Now, I've read that it does higher damage when it's charged, but as far as I can tell that's not true. Only the ability gets powered up. So use the blade for blocking, then switch to your main weapon to attack. Drawing the blade actually counts as a block too, which I really appreciate. I wish you could sheath it just as dynamically after using the ability, just to reinforce this dynamic of switching back and forth. But these are just minor nitpicks. For my main complaint, I need to explain favored weapons. So each Nightfarer, besides the spellcasters, has a favored weapon, which means they have a unique moveset with it. For Executor, he likes katanas, and boy is this moveset awful. It feels fine at first, but the sprint attack is horrible. The way he just lurches forward, it just feels so awkward. But even this is forgivable. The real final boss here is the backstab animation. It activates from about a mile away, has the effective range of 3 ants, and takes roughly a year to finish. If you even think about attacking someone from behind, you'll be stuck roundhouse kicking the air for what feels like an eternity. Now this didn't bother me much at first because most big enemies aren't backstabbable. And then Everdark Libra arrived. He summons NPCs and man, this is where the real clown show begins. I think this NPC fight is up there, with Bloody Crow of Canehurst and the DS2 gang squad. Okay, that's enough. Time to end this.
Wait, what? What? Why won't you die? Nano madness, son. What? It heals me in response to NPCs dying under me. You can't hurt me.
Maybe some of my critique comes across as me asking for an easier time, but this is a Souls game. You shouldn't rely on getting lucky. You have to beat the bosses the old-fashioned way. The right way! That's the whole culture around Souls-likes, isn't it? You have to get good and beat the game through sheer effort. There are no shortcuts, tricks, or overpowered weapons to beat it for you. By which I mean there totally are, it's just that we, the community, are not gonna tell you, or we're gonna shame you for using them. Okay, I can live with that. I understand that I'm not the world's best Souls player, but hey, I beat Elden Ring without using Spirit Ashes or Summons. In fact, I beat Nightreign as well. Yes, even Everdark Libra, although the less said about that the better. But, what's the point of having a customization system if it doesn't let you customize your character? One of my favorite aspects of Elden Ring is how it lets you come up with your own builds with gear, ashes of war and spells. You can build around a damage type, a status effect or spell type, and you can make it work with any weapon too. It seems to me that in Nightreign, this system wasn't given much thought or development at all, and instead they focused on the elaborate new bosses. It's interesting because in Hades, you only have one final boss. In fact, you always face the same 4 bosses after going through the same 4 areas, though there are hardcore variants of each. Everdark, if you will. The emphasis is on build variety, which really helps make the runs feel different from one another. And of course the whole story aspect with new dialogue each time you come back. Nightreign doesn't have such things. You either get suboptimal items and beat the boss in spite of it, or you get lucky and get to feel like you got a buy. And that's just not what I'm looking for in a game like this. All the elements to make a great roguelike are here, and the base gameplay is excellent already. The reason I stuck around for this long is because I was having a good time. I know it's kinda lame to suggest that they copy ideas from other games, but at this point, nothing the game does differently works that well. Not in terms of roguelike mechanics at least. The loot system honestly needs a complete revamp. There need to be several different viable builds for each character so that they can play differently between runs. This is my biggest issue currently. I'm sure additional content is already on its way, but my worry right now is that they'll just add a couple of ridiculously hard Night Lords and maybe a new character or two and call it a day. Maybe bundle in some content from Dark Souls and Shadow of the Erdtree. I mean, it would be cool, but I just don't think that's what the game really needs. And beyond just customization, I truly feel that the game would work better as a dungeon crawler. There are so many classic elements of Souls-likes that you just can't pull off in this format. No interesting level design and enemy placements, no secret passages, levels, treasures. And these elements could benefit a lot from randomization as well, not letting players get too familiar with enemy and trap placements and keeping them more on the edge. I guess I'll just have to keep waiting for that game though. Hey, at least I have the Everdark Bosses to tide me over. Oh, that reminds me, whatever happened to Senator Libra?
It's over! Bullseye! What did I just say? You should try fighting with pure skill sometime, not with rivers of blood or broken passives or anything else.
Wait, what? We got him? It was him, it was Iron Eye, he got him! We're finally free.